Psychologists, what was the most disturbing story you have ever heard? I'm in grad school now for psychology and counseling. One of my professors told the story of a former client who was severely depressed but had no suicidal ideation. His brother and father both committed suicide, and he refused to do that to his family. However, he constantly imagined killing his wife. They had a happy marriage, never fought, etc. She was so compassionate and comforting, knowing his mental state. But he couldn't stop thinking about killing her. My professor made him talk through the act of killing her, closing his eyes and describe every detail, and he said the guy just broke down and sobbed uncontrollably. He felt so horrible. He knew it was so wrong and truly didn't want to hurt her, but he couldn't stop his thoughts. He was diagnosed, along with 3 or 4 other disorders, with OCD because he was obsessed with the thought of killing his wife. This story sticks with me since I always thought of OCD as people who are obsessed with certain actions, etc., not thoughts or ideas. I don't know that you will get a lot of first-hand stories here, since in America HIPAA laws would prevent a psychologist from divulging confidential information. Even if they posted it anonymously and removed most of the details, they could still lose their license if caught. In addition, people who seek treatment do so believing it will be held confidential, and an ethical psychologist would be strictly bound to uphold this. I had a client with intellectual deficits that stimulates her optic nerve manually by pushing her finger into her eye socket and touching it. The medical doctor that helped with the situation said the action causes an endorphin rush that she was addicted to. Luckily, through some pretty dedicated behavioral therapy, she no longer does it. Pretty messed up when it was happening, though. Not my story. My mom worked in mental institutions in her younger years, and actually worked at a large, well-known asylum before it was shut down. There was one woman there that thought she was a vampire of sorts. She was only allowed out 1 hour a day, and they had to use safety precautions. She had already attacked and killed at least one hospital worker before these were enacted. When my mom asked about her, it was revealed that she had killed at least 2 of her children, wounded another as well as her husband, because she had some sort of physical condition called porphyria, which apparently made her crave blood. By the time that they discovered there was something physically wrong with her, she already had lost her mind from guilt and grief. And something I draw from that woman's story that truly fascinates my current understanding of medical science in general is that after all that she still found the will to live. Just to live. So many horrible stories out there of people being tortured in various ways mentally and physically, and yet their will to live still outweighs the relief a quick death could bring them. Perhaps similar to other stimuli, she was able to progressively cope with worse and worse circumstances to the point where nothing could faze her. At any rate, thank you for doing what you can to help the people that need it. OCD is often misconceived as having both obsessions and compulsions, but you actually only need to have obsessions, intrusive thoughts, or compulsions. For those who are interested, the most common intrusive content for those with OCD include harming oneself, harming others, sexual content, and religious content. I have OCD, and it's not a walk in the park. I have fear of contamination. I can't look at my dad, touch anything he has touched, and walk where he has walked without waiting at least a minute first. I don't mind that people say they have OCD because they like to keep clean, but I would appreciate if they understood what it really was, so I can be overt without being stigmatized for my strange behavior. I often imagine accidentally falling while holding my cat or dog, and it hurts or kills them. It's never happened. I'm very careful with them, but those thoughts and images just pop in there and replay, getting worse every time. It is very difficult to stop them, and it makes me very nervous and sad, as if it actually happened. Thank you. I'm always shocked when I see, suppose, psychologists breaking confidentiality just to share someone else's story on the internet. Those who are saying it's okay, as long as you don't mention names, need a lesson in confidentiality versus anonymity. For those who have used mental health services in the past, please know that not all psychologists are unprofessional and unethical enough to listen to you then turn around and tell the internet. I'm sorry that there are some of us who have. This cannot be stressed enough. Mental illnesses can worsen just as easily as physical illnesses, and there are medical professionals out there trained to combat these illnesses with you just like other medical professionals treat physical illnesses. Mental illnesses can so easily spiral out of control, and there needs to be a realization that there is no harm in seeking help, as it can help, in a lot of cases, to prevent the illness from worsening. I read an article a while back on the beginnings of research into callous unemotional traits in children, which are linked to sociopathy and psychopathy. The story featured a family whose son started displaying the traits at the birth of their second child. The kid is now like 10 or so and hates his little brother, but he manipulates adults into believing he's okay, including his therapist. I just know that kid is going to kill his brother someday. If I was his mom, I want him out of my house. I'd protect the kid that had a chance at a good life. Thanks. As a former client with a childhood that is lifetime movie levels of horrendous, I came on here wondering if one of my old therapists just happens to be a Redditor. So far, so good. No stories about me. But I do want to thank you guys for all you do. I've been told repeatedly that with a childhood like mine, I should be in prison or homeless. I have a great life, happily married, great career, and I feel like I owe it to the exceptional cognitive behavioral therapists in my life. Love you guys, and don't give up, even when we wear you down and seem hopeless. You all save lives, not just our physical lives, but our entire existences. Love. I'm not trying to defend these parents. What they did is horrifying, but in almost all cases, the parents are themselves mentally ill as a result of having been abused as children. Unless you yourself suffered years of abuse as a child, I think it's very tough to say what sort of parent you would be in the same circumstances. Some people get help and escape the vicious circle. Many don't. I'm a security guard. I recently watched a guy in the trauma ward of an ER because he tried to OD on pills and alcohol. Found out that this was his second attempt to kill himself, almost 1 year to the date. He said he was under a lot of pressure and couldn't handle it. I really feel bad for the people who don't know how to ask for help. He was admitted to HHS the morning following his suicide attempt. When I talk to a psychiatrist, there are some who don't even blink as you tell them your trauma, but then you find a psychiatrist who got the job to help people and not for the money, and you can see it in their eyes that they hurt for you. In all honesty, I could hear my new psychiatrist sigh and just barely audibly gasp and sometimes see her shaking her head. She's genuinely concerned about all of her patients, but I think the fact that she helps us so much makes it worthwhile for her. Both her husband and her are psychiatrists, and I've never seen a couple more passionate to improve the lives of others. If you want to go into psychology to help others, you won't regret it. If you truly care and honestly want to make a difference, you'll love your job. When I talk to a psychiatrist, there are some who don't even blink as you tell them your trauma, but then you find a psychiatrist who got the job to help people and not for the money, and you can see it in their eyes that they hurt for you. If you truly care and honestly want to make a difference, you'll love your job. Or you will burn out because you care too much. That happens too. I really like how you explain this, as not a lot of people understand how difficult it can be to handle an autistic child having a meltdown. I work with autistic children as a one-on-one therapist to prepare them for school. Now, while I totally can understand why a parent wouldn't want to trigger a tantrum, many parents are doing harm by walking on eggshells, and we see a lot of parents reinforcing unacceptable behavior when they don't even realize they're doing it, and that in the long run, they're adding to the issues that their child suffers from. Humans have a protein that binds our skin to our muscle and fat. That's why it doesn't shift around and is tight to our frame. Cats don't have that protein, and their skin is loose like a suit. Go, feel your cat. Its skin is just loose around its muscles and whatnot. In the wild, it's like that, so that if damaged, it's not the end of the world. Ever seen a rabbit's skin? You just pull it off like a sweater. Cats are like that. Of course, if you don't get it back on in time, or if there's other trauma, etc., etc. It's not something to ever try, and the cat living is a miracle. One of my clients at work has a service dog who assists with the owner's PTSD. The dog is trained to sense the owner's stress and bark or otherwise provide a distraction, so he can politely remove himself from conflict. The dog is a Labrador and was actually a rescue dog who had gone through terrible trauma himself. They are so wonderful for one another, and I do everything I can to help them when they come into the clinic. I've been training service dogs in the puppy stage for 7 years now. The organization I volunteer for does everything except seeing eye dogs. Pretty much every breed is capable of this, but the most common service breeds are Labradors, Poodles, Golden Retrievers, and Labradoodles. Large dogs do better because often tasks require a lot of strength. One of my Goldens grew up to be a seizure dog for a little girl, and my favorite dog, a Labradoodle, is now paired with a veteran and assists him in his mobility. If it makes you feel better, consider the fact that these sorts of things are still capable of horrifying the average person. As a species, the idea of random empathy and kindness is much less notable than brutal cruelty. The latter is thankfully rare, and society's willing enough to do what it can to help. That's how I get myself to sleep, anyway. Unfortunately, I turned around. I didn't even think about it, and did it almost instinctively. For a while after that, I always critiqued myself for turning around, as it seemed unprofessional. I believe if I stayed put and continued talking to her, that it would have helped solidify the fact that what she was seeing was not real. I think not reacting to the knife in your head was sufficient. At least for a sane person, it would be. Okay, next question. What would you have done if there actually had been this woman behind you? I had to be very calm in the moment, obviously. I educated her on the visual and auditory hallucinations she was experiencing and explained to her that they were in fact not real, but just delusions. It's very tough to convince someone that what they are seeing with their own eyes and hearing with their ears did not exist, especially someone who didn't believe it was psychological and believed it was more the devil plaguing her. A massive amount of the calls we get are abusive, sexual, and what you might describe as trolling. It's a shame. A lot of worthwhile calls go unanswered because these people tie up the lines. Some of the stories you hear, you can tell are fabricated, but I still think it's important to listen to them because often there is a reason why the person felt the need to create such an elaborate story, and if you listen long enough, the odd time you'll get to what the actual problem is underneath the fabrication. Wow, Are You Me? Lifetime movie describes it well. And I'm also happy, married, have a cat, doing well, etc. I was once told I'd be in a hospital for the rest of my life, or in and out. Much love, and seriously, I've had good therapists and bad, and the good ones, they've made all the difference. I don't think I'd consider this just gossip. Like, yeah, it's a casual setting and all, but I think hearing stories like these are important to spread awareness. It could spark someone to want to donate to or volunteer at organizations that help people in these situations, or just understand that some people have rough pasts and to be nicer. I get what you're saying, but also, I don't think these people should be used for that purpose. It's not their story to tell. I love the idea of making people want to help and stuff, but surely it should come from the person's own mouth rather than someone who has promised to keep it confidential, but simply doesn't say your name, but says your whole story. I'd really love to hear the answer to this question. They seem to ask a lot, though, rather than just doing it once like an obligation. But then again, it always seems like the initial response is good enough for the time being. Do they have to just accept it? The person I'm currently seeing repeatedly asks me if I've ever been abused, and never seems satisfied with my honest answer of no. Not sure why that'd be okay. When I talk to a psychiatrist, there are some who don't even blink as you tell them your trauma, but then you find the psychiatrist who got the job to help people and not for the money. And you can see it in their eyes that they hurt for you. If you truly care and honestly want to make a difference, you'll love your job. Or you will burn out because you care too much. That happens too. Compassion fatigue is definitely a real thing. It's why it's crucial for people in this field to practice self-care. A big part of clinical mental health services is avoiding transference or absorbing the problems of those whom one is treating. The trick is that a good provider also must have empathy as well. It's a tricky situation, and some are much better at it than others. One big change is that there used to be a requirement for providers to have their own psychotherapy in order to identify and work out their own problems in order to help avoid transference and projecting, and also to help with establishing appropriate empathy and boundaries. But that requirement has mostly fallen to the wayside. Many psychiatrists are still required to do this, though. This is a big reason why even really good professionals will only take on 1 or 2 patients at a time with certain disorders like borderlines and sociopaths. Especially borderlines. Going to get a bit personal here, but in case anyone is curious and doesn't understand it, I figured I'd throw in my 2 cents and personal feelings. Her house is basically like my room. I feel safety and comfort in my room, like all stresses just go away. I sit down in my chair in front of my computer and put on my headphones, and I'm in my own world. When I step out, I just feel uncomfortable/uneasy. Not outside of the house, mind you, just out of the room. And depending on if there's multiple people and I have to do something in the kitchen, I'll feel anxious and panic attacks. Mildly, luckily, haven't had severe ones in a while, until I can get back in my room where I can breathe normally and my body can relax itself. It's crazy how parents can get in the way of therapy when they think they are protecting their kids. I used to nanny for a severely autistic kid who refused to eat anything but chicken nuggets, and his mom, in the interest of preventing tantrums, let him. Finally, I told her I was worried about how skinny and pale he was. She got pissed off at me, but when she took him to the doctor, sure enough, he was underweight and malnourished. It was a really rough transition, but after a few months, he was eating a much healthier diet. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.